Hello everybody, my name is Chris. I'd like to welcome you all back to my series in analyzing literature. And in this installment we're going to continue on in our short story study, the study of the short story The Woman in the Snow. Today is the third part of the installment. So I would just like to give a quick overview and recap of part 2 of the story, which we discussed in the previous installment of this series. So, where we left off in the story The Woman in the Snow was with the death of Grady Bishop, who was this racist bus driver who kicked the woman off the bus, and the woman and her baby, later it was discovered they died in the snowstorm, froze to death on Hall Street, and Grady Bishop was the only one who knew why she was on Hall Street and how she and the baby ended up out in the storm. And it was because of his refusal to take her and the baby to the hospital. The baby had a high fever, and the mother was very concerned about her daughter, her baby's life, so she wanted to take the baby to the hospital but had no way to get there except for Grady Bishop's bus. But he refused to give her a ride to the hospital because she did not have the bus fare. So 1 year after that event, 1 year after the death of that woman, Grady Bishop is assigned to the same bus route, and on the exact 1 year anniversary of that snowfall, that record snowfall, there's another storm. But on this particular occasion, Grady Bishop sees the woman's ghost outside of his bus, outside the bus door, as a matter of fact. And he's scared out of his mind. So what does he do is that he stomps on the gas pedal in an effort to escape from the scene, and as a result of the heavy snowfall, the dangerous road conditions, he loses control of the bus skids off the road, slams into a tree, and Grady Bishop gets killed as the steering wheel strikes his midsection, and he has severe internal organs that are severe damage to his internal organs, and he ends up dying as a result of those injuries. So that is the end of Grady Bishop for the story. We're not going to see Grady Bishop anymore in this story. So I would just like to put a final cap on the discussion of Grady Bishop, because it would be very easy for us to just dismiss Grady Bishop out of hand as a low-down, miserable, hateful, and inconsiderate, uncharitable individual. And in the previous installment, you know, I tried to think of as many adjectives as I could to describe the callousness and heartlessness of Grady Bishop, and I was running out of adjectives. So it's very easy, negative adjectives. It's very easy to just dismiss him out of hand as, this evil individual and have no sympathy for him whatsoever. But I do want to bring up the question, is it possible that even though he's such a dislikable and hateful character, is it possible for the reader even to generate or feel a little tiny glimpse of sympathy for Grady Bishop because of his childhood, his upbringing, the kind of poor background that he comes from, being the 11th child of the town drunk? We know that his father was verbally abusive to him, calling him dummy and lunkhead and these types of things. And we know that his father was an alcoholic, and we know that Grady Bishop had a poor education. And we also know that Grady Bishop is on probation. Okay? At the very beginning of the story, the author puts this detail into the story that Grady Bishop is on probation. Now, one would have to assume that in this case probation means from jail. Okay? Because he's a new hire for the bus company. So it would be unlikely that he's on probation because of something that he did wrong as being a new driver for the bus company. So this word probation is not explained completely in the story, but we have to assume that coming from such a poor background and coming from such a poor family life, that it would not be shocking to us to consider that Grady Bishop might have been involved in some criminal activity somewhere down the road, spent time in jail, and has now been released from jail on probation. So I'm not sure exactly, this is not specified clearly in the story, whether it's a kind of probation through his employment and he's on notice, if you mess up again, you're going to be fired type of thing. That could be possible. Or it could be something jail related. In any case, I just want to raise the point. Can we feel a little speck of sympathy for Grady Bishop? Not to excuse what he did, because what he did was very cruel and inhumane and even inhuman, if you want to use that term, given the circumstances. But I think the author is trying to deliberately slide in a few details that make it, clear that Grady Bishop is also a victim of some circumstances in this story. He's not 100% living in a vacuum. He came from a background that caused him to feel this way about black people, that caused him to have the attitudes and the feelings of power and superiority, and how to step on black people and how to treat black people, as if they were his own personal doormats and that kind of thing. So I think the author is deliberately making an attempt to slide these details in, as I said, so that we will have a little bit of understanding and a little bit of sympathy, however small, for Grady Bishop's plight. Because he ends up paying severely for what he did. Now, obviously, you have to think about, is it a case where, well, he got what he deserves? He was such an incredibly obnoxious, moronic racist that his life being, lost is no great sacrifice for society, and no great loss for society for sure. So you may feel that way, and that's justifiable given his actions towards the woman in the snow. But again, do we feel that his life was a payment for his actions? In other words, he left the woman in the snow and her baby out in the cold, and they died. So should his life now be sacrificed as a consequence, as a payment for that improper action? And I'll leave the conclusion up to you, but there is one thing that you need to consider. When this ghost appears, what is the purpose of this apparition appearing at the same place, at the same, part of the bus loop on the 1-year anniversary to the day of that record snowfall? What is the woman's purpose for showing up at that place? So a lot of people would say, oh, she's out for revenge. She came back a year later on the year anniversary of that snowfall to get her revenge against Grady Bishop. And you can, make a case for that for sure. But we have to consider, is the woman's ghost out for revenge? Because Grady Bishop left her out in the cold and she died, now she comes back, scares the wits out of him, and then he crashes the bus and dies. So did she get her revenge? And was she out for revenge? Okay? This is a question that we're going to have to consider as we go through the second half of the story. So today, I want to get into the second part of the story. And in the second part of the story, we're going to be introduced to a new character, a character by the name of Ray Hammond. Okay? Who is now a bus driver for the Metro Bus Company, the same company that Grady Bishop was employed by. So, as I said, we're going to flash forward 25 years from the death of Grady Bishop. So, let's begin. It says, 25 years later, Ray Hammond, a war hero with 2 years of college, became the first black bus driver Metro hired. A lot of things had happened during those 2.5 decades to pave the way for Ray's new job. The military had integrated its forces during the Korean War. In 1954, the Supreme Court had ruled that segregated schools were unequal. And one by one, unfair laws were being challenged by civil rights groups all over the South. Ray had watched the Montgomery bus boycott with interest, especially the boycott's leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Ray soon found out that progress on the day-to-day level can be painfully slow. Ray was given the Hall Street Express. The white drivers call my route the Blackbird Express, Ray told his wife. I'm the first driver to be given that route as a permanent assignment. The others wouldn't take it. What more did you expect? His wife answered, tying his bow tie. Just do your best so it will be easier for the ones who come behind you. In November, Ray worked a 3 to 11 shift. Snow's predicted, the route manager barked one afternoon. Close it down if it gets bad out there, Ray. The last shift on the Hall Street Express. Okay, so as we go through the second part of the story here, we're going to fill in the outline. So we can start by looking at the first part. It says, list 3 things we know about Ray Hammond. Well, from the part of the story that I just read, we can pull out 3 key details about Ray Hammond. Number 1, he's a war hero. All right. It does mention that he served time in the Korean War, which was from 1950 to 1953. Also, he's got 2 years of college education. And number 3, he's the first black bus driver for Metro. All right. So these 3 details are significant because we are deliberately given a contrast between Ray Hammond's character and Grady Bishop's character. So Grady Bishop's character, we know, we've been through all of that. But Ray Hammond, a war hero, all right, in the Korean War. He's a decorated soldier. He has 2 years of college education. Remember, Grady Bishop was described as having a poor education, maybe never even went to high school. Certainly never graduated from high school, one could assume. And certainly never went to college. And the most significant detail here is that Ray Hammond is the first black bus driver for the Metro Bus Company. So, what year are we looking at here? Well, they mentioned the 1954 Supreme Court ruling that desegregated public schools. That was the start of the end for segregation. And then, as it says, one by one, the laws were changed. And then during Kennedy's administration in the 60s and through Lyndon Johnson's administration, more and more desegregated policies came into existence. So, the desegregation of public schools, followed by the Montgomery bus boycott, another Supreme Court ruling, and then more and more and more changes in the laws to desegregate the South. But as Ray Hammond experiences, there's a lot of resistance and a lot of sort of reticence on the part of the white people in the South to adopt these desegregated or to accept these desegregation laws. So you think about the pictures that you saw perhaps in your social studies class at one time about the refusal of the southern states in some cases to desegregate the schools. And then Eisenhower, who was president at the time, had to send in the National Guard to surround the schools with tanks and soldiers to escort the black students into the formerly all-white schools. So they were very slow in some cases in accepting and following the laws that were now required to desegregate public schools, buses, and all walks of life where they were formerly separated. So Ray Hammond is still experiencing this sort of slow crawl towards desegregation. And he mentions it that the white drivers on this bus route are still referring it to as the Blackbird Express, the same term that Grady Bishop used to describe it 25 years earlier. They're still calling it the Blackbird Express. And Ray Hammond was assigned to the Hall Street Express as a permanent assignment because it says here the other drivers wouldn't take it. So who are the only other drivers? They're white. So they don't want to drive the route because it services black people. So Ray Hammond, being a black person, he's assigned to the route that services black people because the other drivers won't take it. So there's still these pockets of racist mentalities inside the bus company and inside the society that he still has to, struggle with and deal with on a daily basis. And now he's driving the same route that Grady Bishop drove 25 years earlier. Now, what has happened in those 25 years along the bus route? That's number 2 here. What have been the reports about the woman's ghost? So let's continue the story. Since he was a boy, Ray had heard the story of the haunting of that bus route. Every first snowfall, passengers and drivers testified they had seen the ghost of Eula Mae Daniels clutching her baby as she ran through the snow. "Good luck with Eula Mae tonight," one of the drivers said, snickering. "I didn't know white folk believed in haunts," Ray shot back. But parked at the East Side Loop, staring into the swirling snow mixed with ice, Ray felt tingly, as if he were dangerously close to an electrical charge. He'd just made up his mind to close down the route and head back to the garage when he saw her. Every hair on his head stood on end. Before we go any further, let's answer question 2. What have been the reports about the woman's ghost? She's been seen on Hall Street every year on the night of the first snowfall. All right? So it says the bus drivers have seen her, the passengers have seen her. Every year, consecutively, for 25 years, ever since the death of Grady Bishop. Every bus driver and every year's, the same thing. The reports are the same. The woman's ghost appears every single year on the night of the first snowfall. So, Ray is also expecting to see the ghost. Now, what does that also tell you? What have the bus drivers done for the past 25 years? They report seeing the ghost, yes, but what did they do? They did exactly the same thing that Grady Bishop did. They kept going. All right? They did not stop. They did not open the door. They did not do anything except drive away. And that's exactly what Grady Bishop did. So let's hear what the ghost is like. It says here, he wished her away, but she kept coming. He tried to think, but his thoughts were jumbled and confused. He wanted to look away, but curiosity fixed his gaze on the advancing horror. Just as the old porch stories had described her, Eula May Daniels was a small-framed woman frozen forever in youth. So young, Ray whispered, could be my Carolyn in a few more years. He watched as the ghost came around to the doors. She was out there waiting in the cold. Ray heard the baby crying. Compassion overruled his fear. Nobody deserves to be left out in this weather. Ghost or not, she deserves better. And he swung open the doors. The woman had form but no substance. Ray could see the snow falling through her. He pushed fear aside. Come on, honey, get out of the cold, Ray said, waving her on board. Eula May stood stony still, looking up at Ray with dark, questioning eyes. The driver understood. He'd seen that look before, not from a dead woman, but from plenty of his passengers. It's okay, I'm for real. Ray Hammond, the first Negro to drive for Metro. Come on now, get on, he coaxed her gently. Eula May moved soundlessly up the steps. She held the infant to her body. Ray couldn't remember ever feeling so cold, not even the Christmas he'd spent in a Korean foxhole. He'd seen so much death, but nothing like this. The ghost mother consoled her crying baby. Then with her head bowed, she told her story in quick bursts of sorrow, just as she had done 25 years earlier. My husband is in Memphis, looking for work. Our baby is sick. She'll die if I don't get help. First off, said Ray, hold your head up. You got no cause for shame. I don't have any money, she said, but if you let me ride, I promise to bring you the payment tomorrow. I promise. Ray sighed deeply. The rule book says no money, no ride, but the book doesn't say a word about a personal loan. He took a handful of change out of his pocket, fished around for a dime, and dropped it into the pay box. You're all paid up. Now go sit yourself down while I try to get this bus back to town. Eula May started for the back of the bus. No, you don't, Ray stopped her. You don't have to sit in the back anymore. You can sit right up front. The ghost woman moved to a seat closer, but still not too close up front. The baby fretted. The young mother comforted her as best she could. They rode in silence for a while. Ray checked in the rearview mirror every now and then. She gave no reflection, but when he looked over his shoulder, she was there all right. Nobody will ever believe this, he mumbled. I don't believe it. All right, let's pause right there for a minute. So, right here, number 3. Describe 3 things about Eula May Daniels' ghost. Number 1, she's frozen in youth. All right? She looks exactly the same as she did before. So, 25 years have passed, yes, but for the ghost, she still has the appearance that she had when she was alive, back when Grady Bishop first kicked her off the bus. So we know from the description earlier in the story that she was around 20 years old, no more than 20 it says in the story, when she came on the bus and begged Grady Bishop to give her a ride to the hospital. So she still has that appearance of a young woman. Nothing in her appearance has changed in the last 25 years that she's been coming every year to this particular bus stop or this bus location. So that's one. She's frozen in youth. Number two, she has a form but no substance. All right? So what does that mean? She has a form but no substance. Well, when he is looking out of the bus, through the bus doors, and he sees the woman standing out there, he can see the snow actually falling through the woman. Okay? Which means he can see a three-dimensional image of the woman as if it were a solid person, but the snow is not piling up on the woman's shoulders or on the woman's head or anything like that. The snow is actually falling through the woman. So it's mostly clearer if you think of it like a holographic image, where you can see a three-dimensional image of a person, and you'd see the form looks like a human being, but if you tried to put your hand and touch that person, it would go right through the person, just like it would if it was a holographic image. So if you think about the movie Star Wars The Last Jedi, for example, the battle between Luke Skywalker and Kylo Ren at the end of that movie, Luke Skywalker is projecting himself across space and time, and he comes across as a three-dimensional solid figure as that final battle is going on. But when Kylo Ren slices him through with his lightsaber, the lightsaber goes right through, and it is revealed that that's like a holographic image. That's somewhat similar to what's going on here. All right? And then number three, she gives off no reflection in the mirror. All right, so this is consistent with many Hollywood movies and a lot of Hollywood horror shows where ghosts do not give off reflections in mirrors. And it does, in fact, remind me of the fact that with all these Dracula stories, vampire stories, and things like this, and vampire movies, it is commonly known that vampires do not give off reflections in mirrors. For whatever reason, I don't know where that originated, but people have written these stories for hundreds of years about ghosts and ghostly encounters. And one of the things that's consistent through a lot of them is that the ghost gives off no reflection. And one of the other things that's interesting about the ghost in this story is that the ghost presence, when the ghost gets on the bus, what happens? Ray remarks about how cold the bus feels when the woman gets on the bus. When the woman's ghost gets on the bus, suddenly the bus temperature goes way down. Okay, and this is also consistent with a lot of Hollywood movies and stories about ghosts. Is when there's a ghostly presence in the room, suddenly the temperature in the room gets cold, very cold. So if you think about a movie like The Sixth Sense, starring Bruce Willis, which was released around 1998. That movie features ghostly presences, and whenever there's a ghost around, the temperature gets cold and people can actually see their breath in the room. That's how cold it gets. So there's a lot of Hollywood mythological and entertainment type of connections here with the woman's ghost. But she can talk, and Ray Hammond has a conversation with her, which will be coming up. So he talks about Martin Luther King Jr., so we know it's after the Montgomery bus boycott and all of that. So he says, "I owe this job to a little woman just about your size named Mrs. Rosa Parks, down in Montgomery, Alabama. One day, Mrs. Parks refused to give up a seat she'd pay for just because she was a colored woman. Eula May sat motionless. There was no way of telling if she had heard or not. Ray kept talking. Well, they arrested her. So the colored people decided to boycott the buses. Nobody rode for over a year, walked everywhere, formed carpools, or just didn't go, rather than ride a bus. The man who led the boycott was named Reverend King, smart man. We're sure to hear more about him in the future. You still with me?" Ray looked around. Yes, she was there. The baby had quieted. It was much warmer on the bus now. Slowly, Ray inched along the icy road, holding the bus steady, trying to keep the back wheels from racing out of control. "Where was I?" he continued. "Oh yeah, things changed after that Montgomery bus boycott. This job opened up. More changes are on the way. Get this, they got an Irish Catholic running for president. Now, what do you think about that?" So this Irish Catholic running for president is a reference to John F. Kennedy, of course, who eventually became the first Irish Catholic president in our country's history in the election of 1960. So this is how we know the time period of story very clearly. The reference to the Montgomery bus boycott, yes, but also the reference to John F. Kennedy's presidential campaign. So we're obviously before the election, so it's probably 1959 or even maybe into late 1958. So Ray Hammond does a couple of things that no other driver had ever done since Grady Bishop. Okay? So Grady Bishop did let the woman on the bus initially, but then he kicked her off the bus, as we know. Ray Hammond lets the woman's ghost on the bus, and then he does something else that no other driver had done since the death of Grady Bishop, is that he pays the woman's fare. Okay? So going all the way back to, and he does use the same quotation basically that Grady Bishop used, no money, no ride. That's the rule. So we recall how Grady Bishop was so steadfastly fixated on the rules. All right, no money, no ride. That means I'm not going to take your wedding ring and I'm not going to do anything else to help you because you don't have the fare. You need to get off the bus. Because the woman was a colored woman. Now, could we assume that if the woman had been white, that Grady Bishop would have made some exception and taken her to the hospital? Yes, I think it's safe to assume that, because obviously he would not have the same mentality and the same thoughts and attitudes regarding a white woman not having a bus fare as he would for a black woman. So it's safe to assume that, given those circumstances, he probably would have bent the rules for a white woman, but he was certainly not going to bend the rules for a black woman. And we all know what happened as a result of that. However, when the ghost comes on the bus, Ray Hammond's faced with the same dilemma. The woman doesn't have bus fare. Now, obviously it's a ghost, so how's she going to carry around change? I don't know, but the point is the same. He does something that no other driver would do. He says, through a kind of loophole in the rules, it doesn't say anything about a personal loan. So he takes out a bunch of change from his pocket, fishes out a dime, puts it in the change box. Now she's all paid up. So that's one thing that he has done that no other person did in the past. Number one, since Grady Bishop's death, no other driver had let the woman onto the bus. They all just drove away. And number two, Ray Hammond pays the woman's fare. And number three, he does what Grady Bishop should have done 25 years or 26 years earlier. He takes the woman to the hospital. Let's conclude. It says, about that time, Ray pulled the bus over at 17th Street. The lights at Gale Hospital sent a welcome message to those in need on such a frosty night. This is it. Eula May raised her head. You're a kind man, she said. Thank you. Ray opened the door. The night air gusted up the steps and nipped at his ankles. Soundlessly, Eula May stepped off the bus with her baby. Excuse me, Ray called politely. About the bus fare. No need for you to make a special trip. Consider it a gift. He thought he saw Eula May Daniels smile as she vanished into the swirling snow, never to be seen again. All right, so again, Ray Hammond does something that nobody else ever did. Take her to the hospital. That's where she wanted to go from the very beginning. Grady Bishop couldn't do it because he had no heart, and he had no sympathy, and he had no compassion for the woman and her plight. So he kicks her off, and we know she dies. Ray Hammond, 25, 26 years later, picks her up, pays her fare, brings her to the hospital. And then at the end of the story, what happens? She gets off the bus out front of the hospital, disappears, never to be seen again. So what does that tell us? Let's go back to our original question. Was the woman out for revenge? Did she want to revenge Grady Bishop's lack of sensitivity and lack of care for her? So we know Grady Bishop had this callous disregard for her life. But did she deliberately come back to scare Grady Bishop into crashing into that tree? If you thought that, I could understand at the point, at the story where we were. But I would like to also bring up the fact that now she disappears. And we also have to remember that 25 years have gone by and the woman has appeared every year for 25 years. And it doesn't report that any of the other bus drivers were killed because she kept appearing. All right? So the question is, why did she keep appearing every single year for the past 25 years? If she was out for revenge, and that was her primary motivation for coming back and, confronting Grady Bishop one more time, if she was out for revenge and he gets killed, which he did, wouldn't you think that then the ghost would have no reason to keep appearing? Because if that were the case, she would have gotten her revenge if her intention was to get Grady Bishop killed, and then her mission would have been over. So if that was the case, why did she keep appearing year after year after year after year? All right, the other bus drivers had nothing to do with what happened between her and Grady Bishop, so obviously she's not out to scare them into crashing and dying. So I get off the bus, so to speak, with that argument right there. If she wanted revenge against Grady Bishop, she got it. So then she would have no more need to reappear every single year in between. So I would think that is a counter-argument to those who say, oh, she wanted to revenge Grady Bishop. I think my interpretation would be that there's a larger point here, is that her mission was not to get Grady Bishop killed. Her mission was to get to the hospital. And the same mission that she had at the very beginning when Grady Bishop kicks her off the bus, she still needs to get there. Okay? So when we talk about these traditional Hollywood type scenarios with ghostly encounters, one of the other things that's consistent about the ghostly representations in stories and movies and things of this nature is that the ghost has some mission to accomplish. They want to achieve something before they can sort of rest in peace, if you will. So what is the ghost's mission in this case is not to revenge Grady Bishop or get revenge on Grady Bishop, but to get to the hospital. So that is her mission, and I think if you consider the ending of the story, it makes sense more than the revenge factor, because she keeps coming back and back and back, but all the other drivers keep driving away. So for 25 years, her mission is still unaccomplished. But then Ray Hammond comes along, the first black bus driver, and he picks her up, he pays her fare, he drives her to the hospital, so then finally, after 25 years, she gets where she wanted to go. So this is a long way of answering the last question here. What does the fact that Eula May Daniels at the end of the story indicate? That she has finally been able to accomplish her mission. All right? So again, what was her mission? Her mission was to get to the hospital. The same as the first night when she encountered Grady Bishop. It just took 25 years, and it's 25 years too late. But when she gets there, she vanishes, never to be seen again. It says never to be seen again. So she's never going to reappear. So that also would indicate that her mission is finally accomplished. She can finally, make the final change to wherever she's going and rest in peace. All right? So if you compare and contrast Grady Bishop's character and attitude and motivations with Ray Hammond's, it's a matter of night and day. Ray Hammond's kind. She even says it. You're a kind man, she says. Thank you. So Ray's kind. He's compassionate. He's caring. He's considerate. He's scared, yes, really scared when she first gets on the bus. But he doesn't let fear overrule him. He doesn't let fear overwhelm him the same way that it overwhelmed Grady Bishop. And the same way that the bus drivers who passed by her every year for 25 years and never stopped and never opened the doors for her, their fear led them away. Led them away. So Ray Hammond's the opposite. His fear does not overwhelm him. He's able to control it. He's able to harness his fear. And he lets the woman on the bus. And then as they drive along, as it describes, it starts out very cold, but it gets warmer and warmer and warmer as the bus ride continues. So that seems to indicate that the woman is sort of becoming more and more comfortable, more and more relaxed, even as a ghost. So when they get to the hospital, she disappears. So through the course of this second half of the story, when Ray Hammond fulfills or helps the woman to fulfill her mission, we see the entire fabric of his character is completely different and opposite in every way to Grady Bishop. All right? And that's done deliberately, of course, to compare and contrast. So that's the end of the tale. We're going to have an opportunity to start talking about an essay topic, an analytical essay topic for this particular story. And we're going to describe how to start the introduction, how to think about the body paragraphs, and how to think about organizing the concluding paragraphs. So we're going to do one or two more installments of this series and really dig into the story as it relates to how to organize an analytical essay on this story. So that's about all for now. We'll see you again very soon.